Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking at a stack of material you've brought in: forensic psychology, operational intel, political analysis, and it's dense. This is far beyond standard political commentary.
It really is. The documents we're looking at today, they aren't asking for an opinion, they're asking for a kinetic risk assessment.
A risk assessment.
Exactly. We're synthesizing these analyses of executive function, one person's ability to run the highest office, by looking at this collision of a lifelong personality structure with alleged neurological decay.
Okay, so let's frame this for everyone. We're unpacking what the analysts are calling a dual diagnosis model. The idea being that executive behavior is explained by two things happening at once: a pre-existing destructive personality, and then this progressive, accelerating cognitive breakdown.
And, before we even dive into the findings, we really have to touch on the ethical side of this.
The Goldwater rule, right?
Exactly. The idea that psychiatrists shouldn't offer opinions from a distance without an actual examination. But the analysts behind these sources, they make a compelling argument.
Which is?
That the sheer volume of public, unscripted data tweets, rallies, interviews, you name it, is statistically more robust than any single clinical interview, which could, be manipulated.
So they're invoking a duty to warn.
Precisely. If there's evidence suggesting an imminent threat to a third party, in this case the entire population, that duty supersedes the usual ethical lines. They're saying this amount of data makes a remote assessment valid.
Okay, so if we accept that premise, let's jump straight into that dual pathology. The core idea is that there are two vectors, two tracks of deterioration that are working together.
Think of it like this. Intent meets mechanism. So vector A is the personality structure. The analysts identify this as malignant narcissism.
And that's the lifelong part.
Right. It's stable, it's always been there, and it provides the intent, the cruelty, the paranoia, the absolute need for dominance.
And vector B, what's the mechanism?
Vector B is the organic decline. The sources frequently cite frontotemporal dementia, or FTD. This is the progressive neurological part that gives you the mechanism, the incompetence, the memory gaps, the total loss of impulse control.
It's worth pausing on FTD because that's different from what people usually think of as dementia, like Alzheimer's.
It is, and that's a key point. FTD hits the frontal and temporal lobes first. That's your brain's CEO, judgment, language, social filters. So the symptoms often show up as these, shocking changes in personality long before memory goes completely.
So the analysis is basically saying that a confused or demented leader is actually more dangerous because the FTD strips away those inhibitors, those frontal lobe brakes.
That is the absolute core of the risk. He becomes, as one source puts it, unbound. The malignancy that was maybe, held in check by some social rules or political calculation, it's now running completely free.
And the sources use this term, the tetrad, to describe the personality.
They do. It's a construct from Erich Fromm, who used it to describe what he called the essence of evil. It has 4 parts.
Narcissism, paranoia, antisocial personality, and sadism. That's a heavy diagnosis.
It is, but the analysis grounds each one in observed behavior. The narcissism, that's the delusion of being all-knowing, nominating himself for pope, knowing more than the generals.
Right.
The paranoia is the constant persecution complex, the deep state, the witch hunts. The antisocial personality is, it's pretty obvious in the chronic lying, the effort to purge anyone not personally loyal to him.
But the last one, sadism, feels like the most critical piece when you're looking at actual policy. Are we talking about genuine pleasure from other people's pain?
Yes. The sources are very clear on this. They argue it's not just about removing an obstacle, it's that the subject gets psychological sustenance, a kind of fuel, from the suffering and humiliation of his enemies.
And that gets channeled into actual policy decisions.
Directly. Look at the policies detailed in the source material, the creation of what were essentially concentration camps, the family separations. The analysts contend this wasn't policy to achieve a goal. It was policy designed to satisfy a psychological need to inflict pain.
And we're seeing that aimed at people inside the country, too.
Oh, absolutely. The sources point to the rhetoric against Somali immigrants, calling them garbage, singling out Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, saying she should be thrown the hell out. These aren't just words. They're framed as acts of public humiliation, acts of sadism.
So that establishes the intent. Now, the mechanism, the decay, this is where we get into the hard neurological signs. And the sources stress, these are not just gaffes.
No, they're evidence of an accelerated, an exponential decay. The linguistic breakdown, aphasia, is probably the clearest sign.
And there are 2 types they point out.
Right. First is phonemic paraphasia. That's the failure to put the right sounds together. We see it in things like self-care-a-d or that bizarre neologism, kinefi.
So it's not a typo. It's like the brain knows the word it wants, but can't execute the command to say it properly. Like hitting wrong notes on a piano.
Perfect analogy. But here's where the two vectors collide. He then often confabulates. Instead of just correcting himself, he doubles down. He demands reality, bend to his mistake, as if kifi is a real word with meaning.
The cognitive slip feeds the narcissism.
Exactly. The refusal to ever be wrong. We see it with Venezuela, too. And then there's the second type, semantic paraphasia.
That's substituting the wrong word entirely, which leads to these moments of just complete disorientation.
And the examples are pretty jarring. Confusing Iran with India, South America with South Africa. It suggests the internal map of the world is literally dissolving. But the clearest example has to be the Harvard versus Harlem mix-up.
Right, he was asked about anti-Semitism at Harvard, and he starts talking about riots in Harlem.
We had riots in Harlem, protesting strongly against Harvard. Think about what's happening there. The brain misfires on Harlem, grabs the wrong concept, Harlem. Then, to cover the gap, it instantly invents an entire fictional event to make the sentence work.
It's building a false reality in real time to cover a cognitive error.
And that connects right to the loss of executive function. The sources point to two big indicators here. First, the motor control issues, like the wandering incident in Japan.
Tell us about that one.
During a formal state ceremony, he just stopped, blank look on his face, a sign of disorientation, and started wandering off the protocol line. The prime minister and a soldier had to physically guide him back into place.
Wow.
It's a clinical observation of someone losing their place in space, losing their context.
And if that's the spatial failure, then the tariff tantrum incident is the big example of the failure of impulse control.
Oh, absolutely. The sources trace that decision to cancel Canadian trade talks, threaten huge tariffs, not to any policy debate, but to a purely emotional impulse. He saw a TV ad with Ronald Reagan, it triggered a narcissistic injury, and the damaged frontal lobe couldn't stop the retaliation.
So the fate of the entire Canadian economy was decided by a moment of peak.
Yeah.
Like rage tweeting, but with geopolitics.
It's a perfect example of policy being driven by the emotional regulation needs of one person, not the national interests. And we saw it with foreign policy, too. Remember the locked and loaded threat over protests in Iran?
Yes, and Iran's response was sharp, warning that it would destabilize the whole region. It shows how these emotional impulses create immediate kinetic risk. So we have a leader whose personality provides a destructive intent and whose brain is losing the ability to control it. What does this all mean for the actual threat? The analysis talks about a normalcy bias paradox.
And this is probably the most critical part of the whole assessment. The argument is that the political opposition is completely miscalculating the danger.
Yeah.
They're looking through a political lens. They see the threat as external, stochastic terror, lone wolves, fringe fans acting out. They're preparing for another January 6th. They're watching the crowd.
But the sources say that's the wrong place to look.
They say the threat is internal, that the opposition is failing to model for a night of the long knives. Now, let's be clear about that term.
They mean a state-ordered purge.
A purge or liquidation using the actual legal and military tools of the government itself. It seems unthinkable in America, but this is where the FTD diagnosis becomes so important. It changes the whole equation.
How does it change it?
A normal politician might use the word execution as, hyperbole, but for a patient with FTD where those social filters are just gone, execution is processed as a literal solution. He's signaling command intent.
So when he posts about seditious behavior, punishable by death, it's not a dog whistle to the mob. It's a direct signal to loyalists inside the government.
That's the argument. And it sets up what they call the treason trap. It links a foreign conflict to domestic action. Grok Intel, for example, predicts a window for a conflict with Iran. If that war starts, the whole legal landscape changes.
Wartime powers.
Right. And then imagine high-profile opponents, maybe Democratic veterans, call for troops to refuse unlawful orders.
During a time of war, that could be seen as mutiny.
Under the UCMJ, under federal law, it absolutely could. And suddenly those earlier posts about execution become command intent for loyalist military factions. The sources name Pete Hegseth's Red Faction to start arresting saboteurs for military tribunals.
The conclusion they draw is chilling. It says the opposition is watching for a mob with pitchforks, but they should be watching for a black SUV with a warrant signed under the Insurrection Act.
It's a complete inversion of the threat model, and to make it happen, you need a staff that will never, ever question the